There's conflicts in the land of Israel, but there's more than, there's also peace in the land of Israel. There's joy in the land of Israel.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Prince of Peace has already come, and he lives in each one of us, and the Messianic body in Israel seeks peace. I'm delighted to tell you that Messianic Jews and Arab believers, Christians, get together on a regular basis. In fact, pastors and leaders like myself gather twice a year in a quiet place for 2 days and just seek the face of God. Jewish, Palestinian, Arab, a couple of internationals like myself, and God moves, and we come into a place of love and unity in that context as we're focused on Him. There's even a citywide worship gathering about every 3 months in Jerusalem where you have a worship team made up of Arab and Jewish believers. And once again, a powerful demonstration of the peace that comes through the Prince of Peace.
You see, the world says there'll never be peace between Jews and Arabs, between Israelis and Palestinians. That there can never be peace because they hate each other and they can't get along and there's no possible way. But that's not really true, is it?
Well, to have true peace, you have to come into a relationship with Jesus. That's a fact. And so attempting to bring peace through peace treaties and negotiations, I don't have a lot of hope in that, to be honest. But when there's a heart change, then you can have a cultural change, then you can have a societal change, then you can have true peace that doesn't require nuclear arms or arms of any kind. The trust is built, and ultimately when Jesus returns again, we're going to have that peace. There's going to be security, there's going to be prosperity, there's going to be blessing, and the lion will lie down with the lamb. So that's our great hope.
But you've seen during the last 30 years a pretty dramatic change, because at that time when you first began in ministry in Israel, there were very few Jewish believers, and the Christians in the land were typically not worshiping as they worship today.
Right. Well, the Christians in the land, Christian Arabs for the most part, are divided into two groups, really. You've got what we call born-again Christians. They've got a personal experience. They've encountered Jesus, bowed their knee to Him. And then you have cultural Christians or nominal Christians. They can claim that their parents or their grandparents or their great-great-parents were Christians. And so they grow up believing that they're Christians. It's almost a racial identity. It's not a race, of course, but it's so wrapped up with their identity as Arabs and Arab Christians that we get confused when we hear about Arab Christians. Are we really talking about people that have a present experience with Jesus, or is this just history and culture?
Another secret hidden in plain sight. When you first arrived in Israel, the phenomenon known as Palestinians was a very different understanding. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely. In fact, what's interesting is that the Jerusalem Post was once called the Palestine Post, okay? Leading up to the establishment of the State of Israel, anyone who lived in that region were called Palestinians, and that included Jews.
Absolutely. In the passports of Jews, they were Palestinians.
Exactly. Of course, that goes way back to after Jesus, where the Romans began to call that land Palestinia. They didn't want to call it Israel or Judea or Samaria, those traditional biblical names. So they wanted to actually erase history.
And the name originally was kind of a derogatory term in that it was referencing the Philistines.
It was, yeah.
The ancient enemies of Israel.
Exactly. But of course, Palestinians, especially the more radical Palestinians, also want to say and have made declarations that there was no historical Jewish presence in the land. Even in Israel, there was no temple. I mean, Yasser Arafat made that claim before he died. So there is this narrative that has no biblical basis, no historical basis that's being told. And the more times you tell a lie, the more times people begin to believe it. And that's the reality of today.
And 30 years ago, when you began in ministry there, no Israeli Arab in their right mind would have ever said that historically Israel was not a Jewish land.
Right.
That's a very recent lie, but the secret that is hidden in plain view is that it's always been
Right.
a Jewish
You know,
land.
even on the day of Pentecost, it says clearly in Acts chapter 2 that there were Jews from every nation under heaven in Jerusalem for that celebration. There were Jews in Jerusalem. Jesus was on the Temple Mount. I mean, if you believe the New Testament, you can't say there was no Jewish history or presence.
And there's been discoveries in the land of Israel validating without any question not just the Jewish presence, but the absolute certainty of just how Jewish this land was, and every reason, therefore, to understand why it is and will always be a Jewish land.
There have been a number of recent archaeological finds that are quite significant. One is a discovery of David's home, or his palace, I should say. And we're finding various seals and inscriptions that clearly point to a dominant Jewish presence in the time of Jesus. And prior, of course.
Another change during the decades you've been in Israel is the ferociousness of the lies being just spread so far and wide. And as you said, if you tell a lie often enough, people start to believe it. Today, people are believing things that are so far from reality. What's happening? How can that be?
I frankly think that the author of lies, the Bible tells us that Satan is the accuser and he's the liar. He's behind this, and his demonic hordes are helping him cast that lie abroad. And it's easier to spread those lies today. We have instant communication, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and social media. And a lot of people aren't actually listening to reliable news sources. They're listening to rumors. And we're seeing a prevalence of disinformation.
Mentioning Facebook and social media, I asked some of my Facebook friends for questions they might like me to ask you. And one of my Facebook friends, Mike, he asks, how can we encourage the Jewish believers in the land and support them until that last day, whether it's the Messiah's return or they have run the race as Paul describes it? And he wants to know, what can we do for them?
First and foremost, it's prayer. You know, God is the answer to all of our challenges in the land of Israel, and we need prayer from the saints all over the world. It would be great to be able to connect Mike and other Christians from around the world to congregations and ministries in the land so they get to know firsthand what the needs are, and then develop partnerships with people who have a genuine love for Israel. And we're seeing that happen more and more.